he's got approval to go into war and kill everybody, but he needs approval to do a land swap.
It's taken the far-left war hawks a week to respond to Donald Trump's ability to entice Vladimir Putin to the peace talks. They've managed to write a letter and make a phone call. Welcome back to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. The other day I made a video about my position, what I felt that Donald Trump should be doing to get Russia to come to the table. And of course, that's the method that actually brought Russia to the table. This, however, this ability to get Russia to come to the table has upset the war hawks of Canada, Britain, France, and Germany. Now they're all losing their minds, saying, we're not going to give up any ground. We're not going to give any trades. We're not going to make any land swaps. And then they're getting Vladimir Zelenskyy to say the same thing. It was talked about today when Donald Trump made an announcement and Mark Carney made a phone call and the Europeans released a letter, all in an effort to stop, or at least half of what I just said is in an effort to stop the peace. Like what they care about is a couple of square feet of property while they tell you that borders don't matter. Tens of thousands of children are growing up fatherless. That doesn't seem to bother them at all. No, what bothers them is that Russia might get control of a couple of square kilometers of soil. That's what they care about. It's not like they're the ones that are doing the scrapping, and I'll get into that. First, let's just read this phone call between Mark Carney and Vladimir Zelenskyy, which is only happening because Trump got Putin to come to the peace talks. The Prime Minister's desk released a statement on the phone call that he made to Vladimir Zelenskyy in a desperate attempt to try to convince anybody in Canada that still listens to the mainstream media that Carney is not irrelevant and that for all of the money that he sends to Ukraine, nobody in Ukraine, Russia, or otherwise cares what he has to say. Today, Prime Minister Carney spoke with President of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelenskyy. Prime Minister Carney and President Zelenskyy agreed on the categorical imperative of ending Russia's barbaric war of aggression and establishing a just and lasting peace and security for Ukraine. Geez, I think it'd be great if we could establish a just and lasting peace for the entire planet. But to call Vladimir Putin's war barbaric, that's pretty heavy-duty rhetoric right there. The Prime Minister and President welcomed the leadership of Donald Trump in the United States and working towards securing peace in Ukraine in the context of upcoming negotiations. Well, I don't think anybody asked you your opinion on the matter, but whatever. The Prime Minister endorsed the recent statement issued by the European leaders on the same. I have a copy of that. I'll get to it. The two leaders underscored that decisions on the future of Ukraine must be made by Ukrainians, that international borders cannot be changed by force. That's a very naive statement. That diplomatic engagement must be reinforced by continued pressure on Russia to end its aggression and the need for robust and credible security to enable Ukraine to defend its territorial integrity and sovereignty. Oh, that last statement just said that we don't believe that there's any reason to talk to Putin. We should just keep the pressure on and allow Ukraine to defend its own sovereignty. Don't worry about it, though. Carney has offered to send more Canadian tax dollars, putting Canada ever more deeper in debt. Prime Minister Carney affirmed Canada's steadfast support for Ukraine. The Prime Minister underscored Canada's robust military and financial aid to Ukraine, including $2 billion in new military support and the disbursement of $2.3 billion loan in funding to help rebuild Ukraine's infrastructure and public systems. Last week, Canada, the European Union, and the United Kingdom announced their intention to lower prices for Russian oil, weakening Russia's ability to fund its illegal war. The last one's pretty funny, though. Prime Minister Carney confirmed that Canada will continue to cooperate closely with the coalition of the willing, President Trump and the United States of America, President Zelenskyy, and the people of Ukraine for peace, security in Ukraine and in Europe. Let's establish one thing. Nobody cares what Carney is saying, and that's the point. Nobody's asking him. All this money that he's throwing into the situation, all these letters that the European government is putting out, no one is asking him. You see, the European Union asked Britain to come onto the letter that they released. Donald Trump spoke with both Vladimir Zelenskyy and Putin. Nobody's asking Carney what he thinks. Nobody's asking Carney his 2 cents. Nobody is asking him. And that is clearly one of the things that it motivates this phone call, because he's now trying to stick his nose in, just like he's trying to stick Canada's nose into so many other things. The fact that he's throwing $2 billion more at it is something that really bothers me. The fact that he believes that international boundaries are done with, warm and fuzziness is a very startling thing for a man who's supposed to be the leader of a country. The fact that he believes diplomacy, see, on the one hand, he says diplomacy has to be done with military pressure, but don't worry, we can't redraw lines with military pressure. Now, this letter was released by the European Union on the 9th of August in 2025, and Mark Carney's phone call came out on the 11th. And Mark Carney's statement pulls a lot of things directly out of this letter, and he says he endorses it, but nobody's asking his opinion. And if you don't for 1 second believe that statement, then let's just look at the statement for a half a second. Let's just look at this letter that was released. And this will show you that Mark Carney is irrelevant. And as a result, nobody cares what Canadians think. Even though we're sending all of this money that we don't have over to this conflict, Mark Carney's running around trying to beat the war of drums. But really, he's irrelevant. This statement was issued by President Macron, France. Prime Minister Maloney is Italy, Chancellor Merz, Germany. Prime Minister Tusk is Poland. Prime Minister Stammer is UK. President van der Leyen is the European Union. President Stubb is Norway. On the piece for Ukraine ahead of President Trump's planned meeting. And it goes on, it talks about all of the same things that you've heard before. Oh, we're going to have no lines to be redrawn and all that kind of stuff. We stand ready to support this work diplomatically, as well as by upholding our substantive military and financial support to Ukraine, including through the work of the Coalition of the Willing and by upholding and imposing restrictive measures against the Russian Federation. Donald Trump, of course, was asked his opinion now that these letters have been released. The world wants to know all of a sudden, how dare he try to make peace when everybody else in Europe is preparing for war.
Bothered by the fact that Zelenskyy was saying, well, I have to get constitutional approval. I mean, he's got approval to go into war and kill everybody, but he needs approval to do a land swap, because there'll be some land swapping going on. I know that through Russia and through conversations with everybody, for the good of Ukraine. Good stuff, not bad stuff. Also, some bad stuff for both. But they've taken some very prime territory. They've taken largely ocean, in real estate we call it oceanfront property. That's always the most valuable property. Ukraine, a lot of people don't know that Ukraine was largely 1,000 miles of ocean. That's gone. Other than one small area, Odessa. It's a small area. There's just a little bit of water left.
Donald Trump has illuminated a couple of things that I have been mentioning from the very beginning. And anyone who understands the region, the geopolitical situation that has been going on there it's an ongoing situation for many, many centuries, you would have drawn these conclusions initially as well. Putin is willing to come to the table and talk about peace if he can get that land that is already his, and if he has to give up some of the land that he's holding on to, that's fine too. Land swaps is what Donald Trump has been talking to him about. Now, he mentions oceanfront property, but really it's seafront property. It's called the Black Sea. It's a very significant body of water, especially as it pertains to Europe. The Russians have gone to war for it the first time when it's called the Crimean War. They have an independent naval base there that's called the Black Sea Fleet. They kind of operate with Russia's control, but they operate independent of Russia, but they are loyal to Russia. It's imperative that Ukraine have a Black Sea port, a port that they have control of. But many of the people that are along the coast of that region identify with being Russian. They speak the Russian dialect, not the Ukrainian dialect. What everybody overlooks is that in 1989, when the wall fell, they took a map and they drew some lines, and those lines did not coincide with what people traditionally considered themselves to be. They just drew the lines on the map and said, there you go, because everybody overlooks that, right? So when you hear Mark Carney talk about international lines being reforged with military and all that naivete, the reality on the ground is that when the USSR collapsed, people just said, let's just make this what it is. And then this is the roots. Much of the conflict is rooted in this because individuals on the ground there identified and felt closer to and had family with other geographical regions. Now, I am in no way, shape, or form telling you that I understand the ins and outs and the nuances of what particular area, like Odessa, for example, has on the plate. I do understand the broad strokes, though, and I can tell you that we, as a culture, what we need to be guaranteeing is that they give Ukraine a Black Sea port. After that, there's not much we're going to be able to change with the pen. The people on the ground are still going to have their loyalties where they go. The people on the ground are still going to either feel that they speak Russian and they are Russian, or they're going to feel that they speak Ukrainian and they are Ukrainian. It's important for the economic development of Ukraine that they have access to the Black Sea because, as I've mentioned in other videos, they grow a lot of grain. If you want to understand geographically what Ukraine looks like, all you have to do is pull up a picture of Saskatchewan and you will understand what it looks like. That is the primary reason that most of the western, parts of Alberta, Manitoba, and all of Saskatchewan were settled by individuals who emigrated from Ukraine. Because when Canada was trying to tie itself together with a railway, they needed to put population in these areas, and it's just flat. I mean, the joke from Corner Gas, you could watch your dog run away for 3 days because it's just flat. Well, so is Ukraine. So those individuals were well suited and they understood the ground and they thrived in that setting. And now, we come forward, whatever it is, 100 and some odd years, and we can see that, some of the best pierogies in North America you can get in Saskatchewan. So they grow a lot of grain in Ukraine, and like I've told you, much of their grain that they grow is sent into Africa. Now, they grow a lot of grain in Russia as well, don't misunderstand me. However, they need a port. These grain ships are very, very big, and I mean, they're easily as large as oil tankers or ore ships, and they put the grain in there, they sail it down, so they need a deep water port, which is what the Black Sea offers them. It offers them, like he said, Odessa, but Odessa is a port. And so ensuring in these peace talks that Russia gives up a little bit of land along the coast so that Ukraine can have access to deep water port, allowing them to get one of their natural resources out of the country, is part of the swapping that I am absolutely certain he is discussing. Of course, it's unrealistic for Russia to demand that Ukraine become landlocked again, because then there's only one choice. Then they will have to give all of their grain to Russia, and Russia will send, and they might as well just put the USSR back together at that point, or at least this section of it. I muse over this situation and how people are, on the one hand, claiming they want peace, but on the other hand, talking about how the only way they're going to get peace is through military conquest. Unless it's Russia doing it, then they say that military conquest is horrible. The contradiction in that is really, really bizarre in my mind. And the fact that they'll say that contradiction and nobody's really calling them out on it is also a bit strange. I suppose that's where we need independent media as opposed to bought and paid for media, especially in Canada. If Mark Carney was so interested in peace, he would take it at any means. It seems a bit like he's competing with Donald Trump, like he's jealous or envious of Donald Trump's popularity, of Donald Trump's success, of Donald Trump's ability to get a deal made and to be an ability to make changes where changes need to be made. I believe that Mark Carney likes the status quo because that's all he understands, and he lacks the imagination or the creativity required to solve these problems. Am I telling you that Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump are going to come away with a deal? I believe that they will come away with the deal because there's more money in peace than there is in war. And as long as Vladimir Putin gets to hold on to the sections that he wanted in the first place, that the people on the ground wanted him to have, there is no problem in my mind that he should willingly give Odessa and a little bit of a surrounding area to the control of the Ukrainian government. Now, Donald Trump is going to want him to also have control of that government so that he can sail American ships into there. And even if they are American ships pulling out much of the raw material and the critical minerals, it won't matter. It won't matter. He can sail American ships in there and he can put them in Ukraine as opposed to putting them in Turkey or whatever it is. Now, the commercial aspects of this particular piece of land are really what we need to be looking at. And that is something that I believe Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin agree on. That right now, the way things would lie, if they draw the lines where they are, both countries can have some economic prosperity. And if they leave some people on one side of the line or on the other side of the line, that's unfortunate. That's going to bother people. That is often the case. I mean, we can look at in the 80s when the line was drawn the first time after the collapse of the USSR and all of these countries were recognized, we can see that the line was drawn the wrong way. We probably did that so we could keep the Russian economy a little bit quieter rather than have it have access to the Black Sea, which is a significant body of water. Strategically, it is important, and it has always been important in the European theater. So giving Ukraine access to that body of water will absolutely 100% benefit the economy of Ukraine. And when the dust settles, that's what we have to be concentrating on. And I believe part of the reason that they sent that letter to the European Union, or they made that phone call, is because they realize once that Ukraine comes to an end, they're going to have nowhere to send this money. They're going to have nothing to distract anybody with. And the people will realize just how bad their economic positions are. They will realize that their countries are in a horrible state because the far left does not seem to possess the ability to balance their checkbook. The far left does not seem to possess the ability to be responsible with their money or with our money. They've made some very bad decisions, that policy decisions, as I've talked about, that have resulted in all of these economies being on the very brink of collapse. Some of them are on the brink of civil war. Some of them are on the brink of mass riots, which of course will tear the country to shreds. And maybe by keeping everybody focused on Ukraine, they hope that they can alleviate, stall, or delay that. Donald Trump, however, he's looking through a different lens. He wants to get the money that's in the Ukrainian ground out so he doesn't have to come to Mark Carney and ask for critical minerals. And I'll do more of a video on some of the success Donald Trump is having with other countries in his deal making. There was a big announcement just a couple of days ago that was overlooked by the Canadian media, significant announcement. As for right now, I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you for listening. I would encourage you to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this channel with all of your socials. I'll talk to you next time.